Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, watch our eagles fly. Fly, eagles fly, on the road to victory. E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles!
The Eagles and the podcast pediatricians are going to the Super Bowl. Well, not Matt. He went to the last Eagles Super Bowl in Jacksonville. But hopefully I'll be able to check that box off, the old bucket list. Anyway, welcome to episode 23. And let's give Tom Brady that well-deserved early retirement without that 6th ring. We will be covering obesity and nutrition more this season, but we were very happy to see that the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, put out new guidelines to help kids who are overweight avoid any obesity stigma and fat shaming. Many know the oft-cited statistics that 1/3 of U.S. children are overweight and almost 20% are obese. But before we get into obesity, Matt, want a snack?
What you got, Rob?
I'm not sure they have this in New Jersey, but do you like Mallomars?
Mallomars. What are they?
They're pure chocolate. They've got marshmallow. They've got graham cracker in them. They're actually seasonal, so you can't get this in the summer.
They're pure chocolate, but they have marshmallow and graham cracker in them?
Well, the label says pure chocolate on top. But this is a staple. We're talking about obesity, but you had to eat this by the box. Have Mallomars, and they get stale really quickly. So once you open a box, you got to eat them. So here you go. They didn't have this in South Jersey. This is a special treat for Matt.
This is kind of against my my low carb diet.
Eat it,
Hold
Matt.
on, man. That's marshmallowy goodness right there.
It is good. It is good. Okay.
That goes to my graham cracker taste.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Small amounts. Might not have been appropriate for this segment, but I just thought you looked hungry.
Moderation. We are sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk to your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community's standards of care.
Now, over the years, I have been wrong on a good number of things. Agree?
Oh, yes, I agree.
Not Billy versus Bruce, but yeah. I have been preaching for years that the tone of the so-called war on obesity as it relates to kids and teens is wrong and actually harmful. There are many genetic, epigenetic, environmental, nutritional, and yes, Matt, even microbiomal causes of overweightness. And it's unclear why the problem has grown so much in the last few decades. But blaming the children or teens in the pediatric office directly or indirectly just piles it on these kids who get a constant barrage of negativity at home and at school. We pediatric caregivers need to be the ones who help these children and teens build up their self-esteem, and our offices must be a safe place, a safe haven for them. Now, fat shaming is one of the most common forms of bullying in our society today. Really, every single overweight kid has been bullied about it in some way. It's about the only target of bullying that is not lessening much over time. This bullying and stigmatization is done by parents. In some studies, almost 40% of overweight kids report this, and it's much higher in girls when you add the extended family. And yes, I'm talking about you, Grandma. Talking about your granddaughter's weight.
Yeah, that's not right.
Also, teachers commonly stigmatize these overweight students with lower expectations and underreporting of their educational abilities. And of course, the media, it's brutal. Weight stigma is a staple of popular movies and TV shows. 70% of recent kids' movies do this. Larger children are depicted as unpopular, evil, unhealthy, and the target of ridicule, really just as buffoons. Now, what you don't see anymore is comics like Little Lotta. Do you remember Little Lotta, Matt?
Can't say that I do, Rob.
Man, she was friends with Dot. You remember Dot?
I do
Little
remember
Audrey.
Dot. I skipped right over that.
Wendy
comic.
the Good Witch, and of course, Richie Rich. I love them. Now, I have to say, I think part of this is that I had 2 sisters growing up.
Yes.
And you had 2 brothers.
True.
In South Jersey. So you didn't get exposed to that. But Little Lotta was a very overweight little girl who loved to eat and was happy and friendly and protected the weak and beat up all the bullies in the neighborhood with her super strength. And I think she needs to make a comeback. Now, again, I do think she could make some better choices with her food, but she was a great role model for girls that you would not see today. Which brings us to the weight stigma in healthcare. One study showed that over 2/3 of overweight or obese women, their term, not mine, reported being stigmatized by their physician about their weight. When overweight kids come to us and teens, they do not need us to dedicate the entire visit telling them what they already know, that they weigh too much. And insurance companies don't help with their obsession with documenting and discussing BMIs on every visit. The BMI is a math equation invented in the 1830s for old rich white men to get health insurance. It kind of sucks as a parameter of health, although it's all we got. It's not designed well for women and certainly not for children. It doesn't take into account differing body and muscle mass and bone density, and again, gender and racial differences at all. Many Olympic athletes who have a lot of muscle mass are in the obese range for BMI, even though they're in excellent shape.
Yeah, so in the office, we as pediatric caregivers really need to be careful with how we talk with our pediatric patients and their parents and avoid certain terms like fat and terms like obese. These are terms that are just hurtful on so many levels to the children and who are listening to us describe them as such. So really, I've made a concerted effort to stay away from these types of terms. If I have to make a point about a child's growth, I'll use terms like increasing trend, terms like unhealthy trend. Sometimes I'll use the word stocky, but I really do my double best to avoid terms that are just, just go right through a child, terms like obese or fat. So when we're in the process of our exams with the children, I really like to make it clear to the parents that what we're focusing on is that they be healthy and that we are encouraging healthy eating habits and healthy activity. So we ask about their eating habits and we ask about their exercise habits. This new AAP policy statement on avoiding obesity stigmas includes us as caregivers communicating the recognition of many complex etiologies of obesity using better language choice. And I can't emphasize this enough. As we've talked about, I think a little bit in the past, Rob, parents and children will hang on to some of the words that we use when we're in visits with them. Things that I said years ago will come back as a recollection for parents and children. I just said as a one-off, as a casual statement. But people listen, and people particularly listen to their physicians. And remember, it's a family problem more often than not. So getting the parents to buy into eating things in a more healthy manner is huge. Especially, we encourage them to buy fewer fast foods and to spend much less time eating processed foods, and also focus more on dinners at home for a lot of different reasons, even if they've been pre-made, which is oftentimes the best way to go with this. You know, if somebody has a freezer, they can certainly pre-make a variety of foods and put them right in and have them ready to go when they come home from a long day at work.
Yeah, it's almost always healthier to eat at home. But like you said, they remember our words, but they also remember the visuals. So this is a change I've made. We have EMR. One of the nice things with EMR is that they can automatically make a nice growth chart. And when I first started using it, I'm like, I'd show them, and the parents like to see it. And I'll still do that with younger kids. But if there's any question, under or higher weights with kids, I go out of my way not to show those growth charts to the kids, and especially the parents, because they glom onto that, and that's not the message I'm trying to give them.
Yeah, I make it much less a priority, especially if it's something that we've covered, although hopefully in a gentle manner in previous visits. That visualization will just sear into a child's mind and say like, oh my gosh, look at that. I'm not even near what's considered to be. In fact, in the past, I've been asked like, so what's normal? What's normal? Like,
exactly.
Already they're assuming they're not a normal person,
right? Or
what's normal?
Or if one percentage, if the weight percentage is higher than the height, like they're overweight. Like that's not how it works.
No,
it just doesn't go by that. But you don't toot your horn very much, Matt. I like to make fun of you, but I got to mention here, we're talking about obesity. We'll talk about it later. But you actually did something. You started a food prescription program to get healthier foods in your patients, and then I copied it and did the same thing myself. But do you want to say anything about your food prescription program?
Well, we had an opportunity, and it was presented to us, so this certainly wasn't my brainchild, an opportunity through the Food Bank of Delaware to provide fresh fruits and vegetables, about 20 pounds a week worth, or 20 pounds a period worth, to 120 families in our practice on a monthly basis. And this really, it was a little disappointing because not all the families managed to make it part of their world.
Right.
People who initially signed up for it, in that sense, wasn't as successful as we wanted to be. But in my mind, at least, any success along this realm is huge for that family.
I know, and I just blatantly copied what you did, and we signed up 25 families.
Yeah.
And there's a dropout rate, and the weather's cold now. It's hard to sometimes get there once a week, but the families just love getting that box, locally produced fruits and vegetables with recipes, and they have samples there, and they're learning how to cook based on them. So the success stories we've gotten, and I don't think either one of us base it on one thing. It's not just if they're having any weight issues. It's not just if they have socioeconomic issues of getting to fresh fruits and vegetables, but we both talk about that in certain food deserts in the area, and even inner city Wilmington, it's hard to get fruits and vegetables, especially at a reasonable price.
Very much so, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and certainly podcast pediatricians will be discussing the whole aspects of nutrition and lack of healthy diets in the future, if for no other reason than it's really important to both of us.
And so again, want to put a plug in for the Food Bank of Delaware and Giant Food, which is based in the D.C. area, but they've been wonderful in helping that program.
Yes, they have.
Now, Matt, in the last maybe like 10 years, I've started to ask every patient from 7 and above in their well visits, not in the beginning, but in the middle of the visit, if they want to gain or lose weight. And one change over the years is that I get a lot more boys immediately saying, I want to gain weight. And then they say, I want to get big, and I want to get strong, and I want to get ripped. And I think it's whether it's sports or it's the Jersey Shore and media or something like that, I've seen these boys jumping into wanting to get a six-pack. But my favorite answer is when they look at me with a blank stare, which they do a lot, or they just say, I don't know. I'm glad that they're not thinking about dwelling on weight, and I talk about good eating and exercise habits, but I do get a lot of younger girls who will jump up with numbers and weight, and that is a big red flag to me. Now, if they do say they want to lose weight, I make it clear that weight gain and loss is very complicated, and there are many genetic and other factors. And I often specifically mention that they probably have friends, especially the girls who are heavier than they want to be, that they have friends, often siblings, who eat poorly, watch TV all day, lay around the house, and stay very skinny, and that it's annoying. And everybody has something about them, whether it's their height or their sports abilities or their hair, something they may or may not like. And yes, there's a lot of genes that control weight gain, and a lot of people will gain weight easier than others. And those people need to eat a little bit better than others and exercise a little bit more than others, but that it's okay. And I like to explain that for now, for some of them, their weight gain may be a little bit more than their height gain, but that can change. I also stress, I think you do too, that short-term dieting, no matter what these TV doctors say or Dr. Oz says about diet books and stuff like that, that short-term dieting never, ever works. And again, fresh fruits and vegetables, less preservatives. And on the other side of the coin, exercise helps. But I have been reading more and more that it's good to have heart-healthy exercise, but you can't really count on exercise alone to lose weight. That you have to exercise like 5 or 6 hours a day for you to really lose weight. I'm just happy if they're exercising a few times a week and getting heart healthy.
Yeah, I'm so happy when my patients start to eat in a more healthy manner, and that to me is more important than exercise. As you said, I think there's a newer adage out there about weight is lost in the kitchen and muscle is built in the gym, and these are both true. So what I advise to my patients is let's be really mindful, really thoughtful of the things that we put in our bodies, because so much of it is complete junk. In fact, I have this idea. I'm not sure how soon I'll get it up there, but I was going to take a big poster board in my office and put up on a wall, this is what's in a Pop-Tart, with all the gobbledygook that's in there. And then right next to it, this is what's in an apple. Apple. And I just think it's very compelling when people see it visually.
I like that. And also, the other big issue I think we both agree on is that we'd rather see a child or teen heavier than they want to be, maybe, and be happy than to be slimmer and be miserable about it. And we both will refer to trusted nutritional counselors often, and even the weight management centers. But again, I try not to make that the focus of the entire well visit. You had just read that, thankfully, Medicaid is starting to cover visits with us and with specialists.
Yes, at least in the state of Delaware, and hopefully this is more of a nationwide trend. As of 2019, I believe at least a dozen visits have been set aside as being legitimate, according to the Medicaid providers in this area, to address obesity in children. And so this to us is going to be a great opportunity for us to be able to see these kids more often, be more encouraging, take just kind of smaller steps toward their wellness, and hopefully educate them as well. You had mentioned something a few minutes ago about lack of access, but also lack of cooking. And it astounds me with especially many of the young families, especially young mothers, oftentimes single mothers, who have no idea how to cook, just absolutely no idea, because that's not the way that their home had worked when they were younger. You know, a lot of their diets were processed food and fast food based. Just to be able to provide people who are in that situation with the opportunity to learn, or encouraging them to learn. I mean, these things are on YouTube, for goodness sakes. You know, how to cook, how to cook an egg. You know, these things just completely escape a lot of people who are patients' parents these days. And it's really not that hard. And when somebody learns how to do something like this, there's also a great sense of accomplishment. They're really doing something.
And you know, they've cut out a lot of those programs that used to be in high schools.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think they need to bring them back, especially in higher risk areas.
You bet. I mean, honestly, what's more important to most people in the long run? You know, trigonometry, or how to actually eat from a healthy standpoint and be able to cook from a healthy standpoint.
And the better nourishment, the better they'll be able to learn trigonometry. So they certainly, it's a cycle. I think we both agree also that in these kids who have unhealthy weight, that they're much higher risk for mood issues and social isolation. And we need to be looking for it and being proactive and helping these kids out from the get-go. On the flip side, I have personally been to quite a few inpatient anorexia units over the years, and it's stunning how many of these pediatric-aged, mostly girls with eating disorders, trace the origin of their body image issues specifically when they were in the pediatrician's office and was shown their growth charts or told by the pediatrician that they were a bit chubby.
That's really a very good point.
I'd much rather have an overweight teen or an unhealthy weight teen any day over a teen with an eating disorder. Hopefully they won't have either. We also see, especially teenagers, who have maybe a somewhat unhealthy weight but eat pretty well and exercise reasonably, and they do well in school, and they're happy. And to that I say, mazel tov. If they want to explore ways of reducing their weight through reasonable means, I'll certainly help them. We'll screen them for early hyperlipidemia and type 2 diabetes. Certainly, there are some morbidly obese pediatric age patients who really have extremely high risk of health problems. And bariatric surgery is becoming more common in this population. When I first read that like 10, 15 years ago, I was automatically said, oh, that's terrible. But actually, there are a minority of these pediatric patients that really can be helped by this, and having a good weight management center, which we have in our area with experts, can be literally life-saving. I don't know if you've had any of these patients in your practice, Matt.
I've not had any patients who've experienced bariatric surgery, but I know that there have definitely been some success stories in our community.
And lastly, a lot of times in these offices, when we have some of these children and teens, the message really we're trying to give is to the parents who are sitting there, who need to know that their happy, smart, well-adjusted child who has a bit of an unhealthy weight is otherwise doing great, and they shouldn't be so focused on the weight, and they shouldn't be enabling things either by having soda in the house and going out to dinner and eating junk food.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of a double-edged sword, because number one, we want to make sure that the parent isn't harassing the child constantly about their weight and contributing to them feeling poorly about themselves and possibly being clinically depressed. But on the other hand, much of what is incurred in terms of weight gain is a consequence of what's available at home to eat. And it's generally the parents who are providing that. So I think that to keep a healthy kitchen is a family affair, not really up to the child.
And lastly, this is something more recent, but when I have a younger child, we're talking about 1 or 2 that are really stocky and maybe have a family history of unhealthy weight, especially with girls, I try to point out to the parents at that time when the child really isn't listening to what I say as much, that their daughter is probably always going to have a higher BMI. Look at the way they're built, especially if there's a sibling who's built really slim, and that it's important for them to really work on good eating and exercise habits at the same time of building their self-esteem and being a safe place for these girls to come home with. Because when these girls get to be 7 or 8, I mean, boys can be disgusting, but girls are so mean to each other about different types of body types. And if I can get the message to the mom early so she's not putting too much pressure on the child and realizing there's different body habitus, I'm hoping that maybe it's going to be a much better road for that young child. Okay, Matt, I think we've done enough, but we will definitely need to talk about nutrition and the microbiome soon.
I savor the thought, Rob.
Enjoy your Mallomar. We'll be right back.
Because I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, bass. Yeah, it's pretty clear. I ain't no size 2. If you got beauty, just raise them up, 'cause every inch of you is perfect.
We are back with a little more pediatric care news.
Okay, next is pus.
Pus.
Some fuss about pus. All right. So it was reported a couple of years ago in at least one of the journals that for situations where there were smaller boils or furuncles that are incised and drained in the office, that the physician really didn't need to also then prescribe oral antibiotics, that the drainage was enough.
I heard that at that infectious disease New York City meeting they have every November, the big meeting. They said the same thing. I remember they're very specific about it.
Okay. I mean, and certainly if this is true, then fewer oral antibiotics would be utilized. This would decrease antibiotic resistance. We'd avoid the side effects that are associated with them. And also it would just be overall good antibiotic stewardship.
Now, when I do incisions and drainage in the office and get pus out, and I just use the ethyl chloride spray to freeze it. What do you use for pain control?
Bite the bullet, buddy.
Oh, man. Jersey tough. I try to freeze it a little bit. All right. I didn't know that. Anyways, when I do these incisions...
We will use EMLA at times.
When I do these incisions and get some pus out, I always put them on antibiotics, too, for a number of days, usually clindamycin, occasionally Bactrim. What do you do about antibiotics?
I actually, in this community at least, Bactrim is something that most of the MRSA will respond to, and that's really what I'm most significantly concerned about. MRSA is very sensitive to Bactrim, which is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. That's another great word.
Now that we use the EMR, we have to put the whole thing in there.
Yes, we do. So I tend to start with that, and a lot of people are leery about using that drug because of the incidence of Stevens-Johnson syndrome. But I got to tell you, I've never seen it, and so it makes me a little bit more bold in my use of it.
I just worry about sulfa reactions, so I just don't like using sulfa. And, I guess now that we screen for G6PD deficiency, we're not going to probably miss that. But if there's some of those kids out there, that would not be a good idea to give sulfa.
Right.
But anyway, we both
The reason I prefer it, though, is it tastes so much better than clindamycin, which is just god-awful. And I think we've talked about this before, perhaps in the strep thing.
Although Clinda does cover strep better.
It does. It does. If I've got a suspicion that it's strep. You're right. You're absolutely right.
In a study in the Clinical Infectious Disease Journal this fall, doctors from the Washington University in St. Louis found that treating with antibiotics after any incision and drainage, no matter how small, resulted in less colonization of staph and, most importantly, less recurrent skin and soft tissue infections later. Clindamycin in that study seemed to do better for this than Bactrim, although, as you said, you got to look at your local resistance, and maybe in this area, Bactrim would be better. So what are you going to do, Meg? Going to keep giving antibiotics?
Yeah, unless it's infinitesimal, I usually will go ahead with the oral antibiotics.
Me too. We're not changing.
Yeah.
Speaking of Washington University, St. Louis, Matthew, have you been to St. Louis?
I have. I was there it was an EMR conference, and I will say it was a very pleasant place to be. And you know what my litmus tests are?
Music.
And food. Yep. And they both were stellar.
And speaking of food, I have not been to St. Louis, but I feel close to it because recently I bought some St. Louis ribs by mistake. I thought I was buying baby back, but I got St. Louis ribs, which I guess are just a little more fatty. Giant obviously does not have a huge selection of ribs, and it was still delicious, although again a little bit more fatty. And I cooked it in my Instant Pot pressure cooker and used the original Baltimore barbecue company sauce. I don't cook, but this is one thing that's easy in the pressure cooker. It's really good. So the next poker game, I'm bringing ribs instead of your famous bacon sandwiches.
Hey, we agreed we're going to call them Atkins diet sandwiches.
Speaking of antibiotics, one last thing. Do you routinely recommend probiotics to each kid when you prescribe antibiotics? Now, I started doing this last year and say, you know what? Why don't you take probiotics while you take the antibiotics, because it kind of makes sense to prevent diarrhea, but there's really no data on that at all. What do you do?
No, there isn't. I will sometimes. I really try to be sensitive to the fact that the probiotics that are out there, Culturelle, et cetera, Bagea, they're pricey. They're really expensive. And so I hate to infer something to a patient that they need to kind of go out on the deep end of their expenditures if I'm not sure that it's something that they can fit into their budget when there really hasn't been any proof that it works.
And then there's also maybe giving yogurt a little. If I'm going to say that, it's going to be Activia yogurt, not Dannon yogurt, and certainly not Go-Gurt.
Right. No. Although the child would prefer that, apparently, according to
love their Go-Gurt.
No. So the one probiotic, or at least the one organism that I had found that there was at least some evidence that it worked was Lactobacillus rudierii.
Or GG.
Yeah, GG. But then there was another paper published that kind of refuted that. So, but just as an FYI, you may know this already, but so Gerber Soothe, the drops for babies.
We got free samples of that.
Yeah, so those drops for babies, the active ingredient actually is Lactobacillus rudierii. So they're hitting up a pretty germane topic there. However, I think one bottle of that stuff is like $20. Yeah, so it's a bit of a
rip-off, maybe.
I'm not sure. Rip-off might be too strong a word, but it's certainly one has to question the the validity of the effect. So now we're going to really quickly move into a little bit of ear infection topic here. We'll have to have an entire episode on ear infections or otitis media soon. It's very much the bread and butter of us and the work that we do as pediatricians.
It paid for our kids to go to college.
At least partially. Yet another ear infection antibiotic study, and this is in the Journal of Pediatrics in July of 2017. Once again, it showed that high-dose amoxicillin in the 80 to 90 milligrams per kilogram per day realm seems to be the most effective first-line choice against acute otitis media in children under 2 years of age. 10-day course is still best for young children, but for older kids, you can go shorter. Do you give shorter courses for ear infections?
I do, actually. I give usually 7 days to the older kids, certainly to the teenagers. Sometimes as short as 5, depending on the situation and how bad the ear is, because I'm just trying to minimize the damage to the microbiome by the antibiotics. If I think 5 days will do it, and a lot of studies show it will. What about you?
Yeah, I for the older kids, especially actually anybody who's verbal at this point, I will tell the parents 7 to 10 days. If it seems like they're better after a week, then certainly you can stop them. I mean, my understanding of the 10-day issue, we may have talked about this before, is based on 1950s studies of strep. And so clearly, I think every infection is potentially idiosyncratic. So some kids may need 10 days worth of an antibiotic. Other kids might only need 3 days of an antibiotic. I'm sure that you've seen red hot eardrums and the child just happened to have a well visit several days after that and their ears look stellar.
Exactly. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, really turned 3 days, 4 days.
Turned around.
So yeah, I don't think that there's a right answer here. As we may have also talked about in the past, at least in parts of Europe, it was popular and maybe still is to re-see the child every few days to see what their ears look like so that they could stop the antibiotics earlier.
And that may make sense. Although it also used to be popular when I first started that docs would always do an ear check in 2 weeks. And I don't do that. The parents are busy. And
absolutely.
if the fluid can stay for a month, so what if the kid's better, I don't need to see them again.
No. I feel the same way.
And another paper that amoxicillin is best for ear infections for young kids. But this is big news, so hold the presses, Matt. Recently, Dr. Ellen Wald at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Madtown. You been to Madison?
Madison? Mad About You town?
Madison, Wisconsin. Great college town. Anyway,
right, who's starting to Mad About You?
Paul Reiser,
and
Helen Hunt. Ka-ching.
Oh, my goodness.
Got
Nice
it.
for you.
Thank
I
you.
fell in love with Helen Hunt just a little bit when she was on St. Elsewhere.
Oh, I forgot.
I used to love it when she said, Boomer.
Anyway, back to Ellen Wald, who's a great infectious disease specialist, one of the giants. She gave a talk at the last AAP meeting in Chi-Town detailing the epidemiology of acute otitis media in this age of pneumococcal vaccine. And the epidemiology has drastically changed. In the 1990s, strep pneumonia was 35 to 40% of ear infections, and non-typable H flu was only 25 to 30%. But now, strep pneumonia is down to 25%, and those H influenza is up to almost 50%. And amoxicillin is not that effective against many beta-lactamase producing H influenza. So she predicted that Augmentin, a combination of amoxicillin and clavulanic acid, would become the first-line antibiotic for acute otitis media. But again, this is not a formal guideline yet, but that would be a huge sea change of using Augmentin.
Also remember that if you have a child who is labeled as being amoxicillin or penicillin allergic because of a rash or hives when they were younger, most of them either never were truly allergic to the amoxicillin or they can grow out of it. So you should send them for an allergy skin test, and if the skin test is negative, the allergist will give them a dose of amoxicillin in the office on a titrated scale, and then watch that young man or young lady for a series of hours just to make sure that they don't continue to react. And in fact, one of the pearls that I learned when I was in medical school was that 90% of adults who think they're penicillin allergic actually are not. This was a label put on them when they were children, again, probably because of a viral rash that happened in the midst of an amoxicillin.
Absolutely. So many people are mislabeled their whole life with this. And while I try to do that when I see them in their childhood and mention it, my cutoff, my time that I really want to get it done is before they go to college. I'm like, all right, I say to the moms, before they go to college, let's just figure out if they truly are allergic to it. So they're not going off into the world having an entire class of antibiotics not open to them and worrying about it. If we did use Augmentin more, what we obviously will see a lot more of course, is diarrhea.
Absolutely.
I mean, Augmentin just means diarrhea. And hey, Matt, do you know the diarrhea song?
I do. I was going to save it for the diarrhea episode, but
I know, but I can't save it anymore.
I'll give you my favorite line.
All right, we each do our favorite line.
Right. So my favorite line is, when you're sliding in the first and your butt's about to burst, diarrhea, diarrhea.
No, I have two. The one that I'm rejecting is the one that's people think it's funny, but it's really wet and runny, diarrhea. But I don't think that's gross enough. I'm going to go gross. I'm going to go gross. So my favorite one of all is diarrhea. Some people think it's gross, but it's excellent on toast. Diarrhea.
Ew.
I know.
I thought I was supposed to be the gross one usually.
I
Rob.
I try.
You rose to the occasion there. Oy, oy, oy.
Items in the pediatric news the last few weeks. One is that they put out new pediatric syncope guidelines. And really the bottom line was get a 12-lead EKG on all pediatric syncopal episodes no matter what. I think we both do this already.
Yeah, so if somebody overtly faints, it's always a good idea, if not just flat out ordering it, then at least to really seriously think about it. There are very few exceptions that I've made. Kids who, for instance, will definitely drop to the ground whenever they see blood, or just the trigger, the child, and you don't have any suspicion that it's cardiac. Those kids I might not get a 12-lead EKG on. But most other kids without a clear-cut history of along something like that, yeah, I think that's the standard of care.
When in any doubt, get an EKG.
Absolutely. Okay. There's also been an update on new allergic rhinitis guidelines, and basically the bottom line here is nasal steroids should really be a priority even over oral antihistamines. Although sometimes, as we both know, using both of them is what makes most sense. But it's just sometimes difficult, number one, to convince parents that just because it says steroid doesn't make it bad. And also, I think for some of the younger kids at least, and in fact for some of the older kids, it's difficult to convince them that putting something in their nose and spraying it is going to be to their benefit, because a lot of them are just completely put off by the idea of having something squirted in their nose, which is a frustration, because I've had teenagers, Rob, I don't know if you have too, who could be so much more symptom-free by using this type of a medication, and they refuse to do it.
Absolutely. They'll put their finger in their nose, but they won't use nasal spray.
All right. Hey, Rob, what is the number one legal drug in the world?
I know this one because I bring it up to my teens. The answer is caffeine.
Caffeine. So the main source of caffeine is coffee, and many studies keep showing that daily coffee of 2 to 3 cups a day in adults, decaf or regular, decreases mortality and especially heart disease and even type 2 diabetes. Coffee seems to be great for everyone, except maybe for pregnant women.
And these studies keep coming out, and I'm not a coffee guy. I think you're more of a coffee guy than me.
Yeah.
But I'm not a coffee guy, but I just worry about teens drinking more coffee, especially caffeinated coffee, because of the sleep issues, the rebound issues, the rebound headaches, and dependency issues. And unfortunately, most high schools sell it, which is crazy to me. They're selling drugs to teenagers. To me, I don't think high schools should be selling caffeinated coffee.
Do you have, I know you're not a huge coffee guy, but do you have a preferred coffee?
Something light, maybe with chocolate in it. You put some chocolate in it, I'll do it. But,
and maybe a little whipped cream for you.
Whipped cream, especially if it's called hot chocolate. That's the kind of coffee is hot chocolate.
I actually, and I get teased about this a little bit, but one of my favorite coffees, because I'll have coffee every morning, kind of 2 nice big cups, is Costco. I actually like Costco's coffee, the ground coffee. I put it in my coffee maker, and it's actually very good. Now, I have it rigged so it'll be even stronger, so I make it pass through 2 filters and the one that's already in there, so that gives it a little bit more punch. There's another coffee, I think you and I have discussed it
don't
before.
mention.
Oh, come on, man,
disgusting.
I'm going to do it. It's mushroom coffee. This stuff is delicious. Rob doesn't know what he's talking about, but I will give kudos to this to the Tim Ferriss show that turned me on to this. This is by a company called Four Sigmatic, who are some crazy Scandinavians who make this coffee, and it is yummy. So my personal favorite has chaga and lion's mane mushrooms in it. I mean, who wouldn't want to try that, Rob?
Me.
Come on.
Me.
Did you try it? Didn't I offer you? Didn't I give you some?
It's
You don't know
disgusting.
what you're missing, man. It's good stuff. Plus, it's supposed to be like a neurotropic, so I need all the smartness I can get if it's going to help me out.
I agree with that. With that point.
All right, so that's it for today. We'll wrap it up on the mushroom coffee topic. All right, so don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues to subscribe to Podcast Pediatricians on iTunes, Stitcher, etc., and to check out podcastpediatricians.com and our YouTube video of our live Podcast Pediatricians Grand Rounds last month. We are working on upcoming episodes on pets, privates, and what to do about non-vaxxers in the office.
And again, you can subscribe to the Podcast Pediatrician channel on YouTube.
We have our own channel?
We have a channel.
Oh, you're so high-tech, man. I like it.
Thank you.
All right, say goodnight, Rob.
Good night, Carson Wentz.
Oh, it killed me.
When you're sliding into first and you're feeling something burst, diarrhea, diarrhea. When you're sliding into third and you juicy turd, diarrhea, diarrhea. When you're sliding into home and your shirts are full of foam, diarrhea, diarrhea. When you're sitting in your Chevy and your shirts are feeling heavy, diarrhea, diarrhea.
Kevin, honey, where'd you learn that song?
Last summer at camp, Mom.
Ah, that was money well spent.
Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.